you want to know what currently the best builds to carry your ranked matches are. Today, we're gonna answer this question in form of a tier list. I try to bundle specs of the same class together. However, I will make adjustments throughout the video, so be sure to watch the video completely to fully understand my arguing and the current meta. I did this video on my stream with my chat. Be sure to join us in future streams when we do other discussion and tier lists. But now, enjoy. I'm talking here about solo queue, not even duo queue, ranked PvP. So some builds, you might say, are in a really low elo, for example in, let's say in silver tier. A lot of people playing really easy builds, for example Mechanist, maybe even Scourge. Those builds are really popular there. However, I would put them really low because I'm not talking about how popular a build is. I'm talking about how well this build performs if you want to get high rating. Scourge is just really tanky, but in Conquest PvP, in my opinion, it's grieving. If you play Scourge, it's grieving. The reason for that is that a Scourge is just tanky and slow, but it doesn't even have a shroud, and the damage is not non-existent. So you will die after a few seconds, minutes, whatever. It's just annoying. It's just annoying the team. It's also annoying actually your team, not only the enemy team, because you are just a punch, a sandbag that they can punch, you know. So I think this build, you should not play this build. When you are enjoying Necromancer, all the other Necromancer specs are way better. So just please don't play this. In my opinion, this is, even if you're in silver, this build will not be the build that carries you. Of course, if you enjoy it, don't get me wrong, play the build you like. That's important in Guild Wars 2, just have fun. But I would say, you know, this build is just obnoxious. It's really abysmal how good it is. It's not good at all. So I want to get it across. It's really important to me. And let's stick a little bit with some Necromancer specs. I think Core Necromancer, and that's the important part here actually, Core Necromancer is definitely better than Scourge. Why is that? Core Necromancer has a Shroud, and the Shroud makes a Core Necromancer way tankier than a Scourge. Yes, you lose support, for sure. You don't have barrier, you don't have that much cleansing access, but therefore you get the life force, the Shroud, that makes you tankier, and you are actually quite oppressive if you can CC chain someone with your fears, and that might kill someone, even a meta build, like a Willbender. If they get corrupted and you CC chain them, you can kill a Willbender with this build because you're so tanky and really annoying to fight. It's not, don't get me wrong, it's not the strongest build, but it's, in my opinion, for sure better than a Scourge. And if you are a Necromancer enjoyer and you don't even have any expansions, Core Necromancer is a good pick because it's actually, if you know how to play it, it can even win 1-on-1s, it can carry teamfights, it's not bad. Of course, I wouldn't put it in S tier, but I would say it's a build that people underestimate. Yeah, Core Thief, that's a hot take maybe, but I think Core Thief is C tier. You can also play it. It's lower than Core Necro, for sure. But in my opinion, it's a good pick to some circumstances. You can play X, you can play a Condi variant. They are not really good, but you can surprise people, and it's definitely better than Grieving tier. Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to put that out there because both of those builds are actually okay to play if you don't have any expansion. So we have Reaper and we have Harbinger. Both actually, so I would say I would consider the Power Reaper build and the Condi Harbinger build both to be really bad right now. Why is that? I think the Condi Harbinger variant is just a bad Condi Reaper, and the Power Reaper is just a bad Power Harbinger. So they are somewhat the opposites of each other. Why is that? I think the Spear fits really well on a Power Harbinger. Just because you have the defense with the Blood Trade line, with your own self-sustain and regeneration of your Blight and stuff. that the Power Reaper would miss. The other thing is true for a Condi Reaper has a lot of just hit points that the Harbinger misses when you play Condi. So I think both of them together are actually quite in a good spot. But I would say Power Harbinger I would put into A tier. It's not quite into S tier yet, but it's a really good build. You can sustain really well with this build because you have so much passive healing, you have so much barrier generation as well, and you actually have quite a surprising amount of damage. So in my opinion, this is a classical A tier build. A tier builds for me are builds that you can easily play and don't have a problem. They are not the first in line to receive any nerfs. For that we have the S tier. But if the S tier build gets nerfed, they might be the best builds that we have. So I think Harbinger is in a really good spot right now. For Condi Reaper in particular, not Power Reaper, Condi Reaper, I would say this build is maybe it's a different. You play it in a different circumstance. If you don't have a support on a Power Reaper, sometimes that feels really, really bad. If two of, even sometimes only one Willbender is engaging on you and you don't have any support, you don't have any peel, you just might die from it if you don't have the life force. A Harbinger can resustain, can counter pressure. A Condi Reaper might have difficulties against a good Willbender. However, it's a really good carry build for team fights. So I would say it's also A tier in my opinion. It's completely different playstyle than the Harbinger because Harbinger is quite fast, you are a little bit more squishy, but you can also burst someone. With this, it's more like you want the long game. You want a fight that goes for 2 minutes because you will actually just pressure them over time. And this is in the current meta a little bit harder to do most of the time because people are playing really aggressive builds like Willbender. But if you get matchups that make that doable, you can easily carry with a Condi Reaper as well. So I would say it's a little bit lower than a Harbinger for most build circumstances, but in my opinion it's definitely a valid pick. Let's go with Spectre. So Spectre for ranked is in an interesting spot. I think I have to really think about it when I encountered the last Spectre. It was probably I did not encounter any Spectre this season in ranked. Why is that? Spectre is really hard to play for what it provides. At least if you want to play it really to its highest potential. Because Spectre is not only a Condi damage dealer if you play it with Scepter, but it's also a really good supporter, at least in 2v2s or something. So if you play it well, like Maya or something, in the high level ATs, you actually can make this build really, really good. But in ranked play, oftentimes the support that you provide is not really that valuable, and it's also a Condi build that might be really easy to kill by a Willbender or just by a Condi Necromancer. Oftentimes to just get counter pressured by the condition transfers and so on. So I would say this build is for me classical B tier. It's not as good as the A tier builds when it comes to carrying, but it's still a very valid pick. So B tier builds are totally fine builds that are just slightly worse than the A tier builds in the sense that they are not that universally good. You just sometimes struggle with it. If you're not really just a one trick that only plays this build, then you might make it work in every match or in a lot of matches. But A tier builds are just generally good. If you just play one A tier build all the time, you will probably come into Platinum quite easy. Oftentimes the matches are not that bunkery. You can easily burst someone. That is especially true for Deadeye, because Deadeye even has ranged damage pressure. But X Daredevil is also really strong. So I, in my opinion, would put both of these builds into A tier in ranked. Why is that? Because I think even though in ATs it might be harder for them to perform, I would say both of these builds in ranked can carry really hard just by rotating and just out-rotating the enemy team just by yourself. And not a lot of classes can do that. And in ranked, it's commonly the case that someone is just following you and is slower than you, and you get way more value from being a fast player. Therefore, I would put them actually higher than Condi Reaper in most circumstances. Engineer is in a bad spot. I think overall, Engineer might be the worst class to play. It is still really valid. You can easily get into high rating with it. But I think if you played another class, you might have an easier time. Why is that? It's just all the other classes feel in almost every single situation more useful. It doesn't matter which elite spec or spec you play as an engineer. So the best spec that I would see here is probably Holosmith. But even that is not that strong. So Holosmith I would put into B tier. If you can perform really well, if you know what you're doing. For example, Sukaya. If you see those guys playing, they are really good. But it's hard to play and you can get punished really hard. However, it's a fun spec, so don't forget that. Fun is always important as well. And I think Scrapper is worse than that. However, it is still okay. Yeah. Maybe I have to make another tier here, just because I don't want to put Scrapper in the same tier as Core Rep, Necro and Core Thief. But yeah, maybe it's B tier. Let's say low B tier here. The only thing I want to say about Scrapper is easier to catch when you have a lot of CC, because they mostly run only one Sunbreak. You can punish really hard, but the super speed helps them a lot. However, they are not that strong as they once were. So they are, I would say, yeah, quite hard to play. Even if you know what you're doing, you can get killed easily. So that's a really big negative of this. Mechanist. Mechanist, in my opinion, is a really bad spec for PvP. Yes, you might perform well in Silver, because you don't have to concentrate so much on dealing damage, because your mech does that damage for you. But to be honest, the damage is actually really easy to negate as an opposing player. And it's not good. You know, the only skill that is really good on Mechanist is your shift signal, because it's a stun break, it's a teleport, it's a cleanse, and the passive is good. So this is the only thing that speaks for this. Otherwise, the Mechanist is just not... All the other engineer specs are better than it. Yeah, for sure. So I would put Mechanist in Grieving. So for all the mech enjoyers, I'm sorry, but that's just my opinion. I think it's not good in PvP. You should not play that. Of course, if you want to learn PvP first, yeah, maybe it's an easy build. But I think it's also not a good build, so better learn something that is also good at the same time, you know. But okay, yeah. And now the hard truth, I think Core Engineer is far better than Mechanist. Really far better. I would even go as far as I would say with the new Spear Edition, the Core Engineer is low B tier. It has crazy damage. You play it as some kind of outnumberer roamer build, and it's really good. It's not as good as A tier, and it might even be C tier here. And those builds are D tier, maybe. It might be true. But yeah, it's hard to say. Maybe we put one more thing in here. So like this, I would say. Yeah, maybe like this for now. I would say, if you see how Holo plays, he got rank 1 last season with mostly Core Engineer. It's easily doable. I would say, yeah, maybe like this. It's really hard to say, but it's more preference, you know. Engineer is, in my opinion, in a tough spot, and you should play what you like more, because they are not that much different from each other, at least if you exclude Mechanist. So Warrior is in an interesting spot. Warrior has various builds that you can play. Not all of them are really good. But you can play them in ranked. So you have Berserker, you can either play the classical Skull Grinder Condi side nodding build that is quite strong. I would say it's B tier because it's not the best side noder right now, but you can make it work for sure. You could also play some really aggressive Berserker Greatsword variant or even Gunflame build, but then it gets slower because you can easily get punished. So if you are a lone cap or someone like that, you enjoy that and you play that all the time and you can surprise people with it, but I would say it's not as strong as a Condi side-noding Berserker. Bladestorn, in my opinion, is not that good. I would say Bladestorn is D tier. It's not grieving yet, but it's close. Because why would you play a Bladestorn when you have all the other warrior specs that might just perform the same role better than you? Because the Gunblade is just really, really bad. The Gunblade itself is okay, let me correct that, but the Dragon Trigger is really bad. You don't have a stun anymore, you have a really long cooldown, you can't interrupt it anymore with your instant casting it, and you can't really recharge all your ammo skills that easily, so it's really, really nerfed. And that's fair, but it makes this build really bad. So sorry for all the Bladestorn enjoyers in chat, but this build is definitely not the way to go. Yes, I think it's a fun build. It's cool that you have a really big damaging spell. I get that, but in my opinion, it's just not working anymore because it's just people either know how to dodge it, or even if you get hit by it, it's just damage. You know, the stun is gone. Previously, you had a nice stun on it, which you can land some damage after that, but now it's just a really mediocre pick. You know, don't get me wrong, it's in D tier, it's not grieving, you can play it, you can make it work, but all the other warrior specs, in my opinion, are easier to perform well on. Yeah. And the Condi Berserker build, in my opinion, is something that is actually has quite a high skill floor. So you can't just spam all your attacks and hope to win. You get punished really hard on it. You have to know what you're doing. So this build is actually quite hard, you know. So it's in B tier because you can perform well on it if you know what you're doing, if you understand your build, but I would say Spellbreaker is better than that. Spellbreaker, at least the strength variant, has a lot of damage. So I'm not talking about the spear variant that we had way back when the spear was really strong and when it just came out. So I think spear is dog shit now, but with greatsword and strength, it's actually quite good. So now we come to the last warrior spec, which is Core Warrior. I just posted a video, I think 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago, about Core Warrior. And the last monthly AT, we had the second place team played Core Warrior. They did not play a Core Warrior that was supportive, but it was more like a bunkery, but also a little bit of support element warrior. And this build is actually quite okay. I would say it's quite okay. It's not like it's hard carrying your ranked games because you're a bunker, you can just troll. But if you know how to do it, I would say it's a B tier build. That might be a really hot take, but I think either you play a full support warrior that can dash out a lot of damage, a lot of healing, or you play a really selfish with longbow and you sustain yourself really long. And if you know how to make that work and people just can't kill you, you survive 1v2s the whole match, most of the time you can carry your matches because of that. It might not be the most fun build that you can play because you rely on your team to win outnumbered team fights and fights in general. But it is a really good build for ranked if you can kite, if you know how to make it work. So that's a funny thing that all the warrior specs are actually somewhat decent. They are not really on the top of builds right now, but they are somewhat decent. So I would say warrior, except Bladesworn, is in a okay-ish spot. Let's continue, I would say, with Revenant. So Revenant is in an interesting spot. I would say we have Vindicator. And Vindicator, we had two variants of Vindicator. We either have the Power Vindicator build. It was really oppressive, let's say a year ago. But now it's nerfed really hard. And I would say it's not good anymore. On the other side, we had the Healing Vindicator that the Frenchies played. And it's really good. It doesn't have a revive skill, but it has a really high amount of just healing output that it can provide. And barrier. So this build was actually quite good. However, ArenaNet nerfed it, which is really interesting because no one else played it. So with that in mind, this build is in ranked, in solo queue ranked. I would not play this build for the most part. You can surprise people with it, but I wouldn't play it. So I would say Vindicator is low C tier because it's not that good anymore. If you want to carry ranked matches, it's not working that way. You can troll, you can also play some Power Vindicator and really outplay the enemies. But for the most part, I would say you could do that better on another Revenant Elite spec. We will get to that in a second. But I think Vindicator is not the best Elite spec for Revenant. Let's go to Core Revenant. Make it short. This build is shit. It's just lacking everything. And that's it. So don't play it. It might be the worst build that currently is out there. Yeah, it's just not working. It misses everything. And yeah, I think that's all I can say about it. I would put Renegade in D tier. Sorry for all the Renegade enjoyers, but Renegade is not something that is really good. Renegade, the trade line doesn't give you that much. Your altered F abilities don't really have any use. Most of them are not really usable because they cost so much energy, and even if they would be usable, they don't have that much value. So why are you playing Renegade? You can now play shortbow on any build as a Revenant, so it's not really valid why you would play this. So I would say even a Power Vindicator is better than a Power Renegade, for sure. I think Renegade is in a really bad spot. I think even after the rework of the color spirits, it's not in a good spot. I think they have to maybe rework it again or just say it's not a build that we want to see in PvP. Which is fair. I think some builds like Scourge and maybe even Renegade Spirits should not exist in PvP as a really good build because it's just really annoying to fight. The idea of having a conquest fight. Thanks for the follow, Tabletka. Having a conquest game mode where you have nodes that you have to fight on and you have spirits or shades that you can put on the node and just deal damage all across the node is not healthy for the game mode, and therefore I think builds that really play like that should be different, should be not played in PvP. And Filthy Cashin, you are definitely right there. I think adding the weapon master proficiency that they added with Soto made a lot of build crafting non-existent anymore, because now you just play the best weapon on the best spec and that's the spec you play. You will never go back to a slightly inferior spec to go for the weapon, because why would you? You can now play the weapon on another spec. And that hit Revenant really hard, because the Greatsword from Vindicator is a really good weapon, and the Shortbow from Renegade is a really good weapon. But the elite specs themselves are not that crazy good anymore, so Herald is just better, Even Power Herald is, I would say, with Greatsword, better than those two specs nowadays. Maybe Vindicator is a little bit better, but we have a really good build here. which is the Condi Herald with Spear. I think Condi Herald with Spear is low S tier or high A tier for ranked. The reason why I would say it's so good is because the Spear has very good damage, has amazing CC. You have not only your force skill that is really, really good, but also your slow application, your chill application. If you know how to play this build, it's extremely strong. It might not be, maybe it's not S tier, maybe it's A tier, I'm not sure. Depends a little bit on what you would say is needed for an S tier build. But you have a lot of damage mitigation just by toughness and a lot of dodges, you have blocks, you have just a lot of damage. It's just an annoying build to fight because you just deal damage passively and people don't really dodge all of that all the time. So especially with all the Willbenders or all the melee builds around, this is a really good build, for sure. And by far the best Revenant spec for ranked play, for sure. They're not even close. So Ranger is in an interesting spot. So if you watch Boys, you will see he still plays Ranger, but Ranger is in a really tough spot right now. I think Ranger has never been so bad in the last 2 to 3 years. Why is that? Spear is actually not that good. And all the other classes got spears that are quite good. Yeah. With the exception of Warrior, which the spear got nerfed into the ground. But all the other classes actually could use spear quite well. And Ranger did not so much. So all the Ranger specs are actually not that useful. So let's start by Core Ranger. Core Ranger is for me D tier. You can play it. It's a build that works to some extent. It's not horrible. It's not like you're grieving. But most of the time, if you see someone that plays Core Ranger, you know it's gonna be tough because Untamed is just the better Core Ranger. It's harder to play, but it's way, way better. So Core Ranger is just weak in that sense that it has a way better version of itself. And that would be the Untamed build. I think Untamed for ranked is really good. It's not as good as it once was, before the nerf of the teleport. Maybe even after that, it was really good. Longbow, Untamed. Now it's a little bit worse, but maces really help. You have a lot of CC, a lot of damage. I think that's an A tier build for me. Yeah, for sure. It's just a really good build. It's not easy to play, but if you understand how you can do your combos, how you can CC lock someone, this build becomes really oppressive, especially in ranked. Let's go to Soul Beast. I think Soul Beast for ranked is quite okay. You can either go a full power Sigem Soul Beast, which is really good to burst people, but it's really squishy as well. Or you can go for some Condi Soul Beast, which is also quite decent. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely not A tier. And it might be high C tier, but it's not horrible. It's not horrible. It's a build that makes sense, you can play it, but it's definitely not broken or anything, you know? It's far from it actually. I would say this build needs a nudge to get better, because it's quite squishy and not crazy good. So Druid is an interesting spot. Druid is the same, we had it before with the weapon proficiency. The maces help Druid a lot, because you can play some power tanky side noting Druid, which is quite okay. But it's not like you can carry with it, you know, it's not like you win every single 101 with it. And it's also capable of rezzing allies, which can help really, really big time in team fights or just some weird random ranked stuff that can happen. But I would say it's also not that crazy good. It's not like Druid is carrying every match. So I would say Druid is somewhere around the maybe C tier as well, maybe in B tier, low B tier. yeah, something like here. Yeah, like this maybe. It's easy to play to some extent. Way easier than Untamed. But I would say it's for sure not that good. Yeah, I would leave it at that for now. I'm not completely convinced with those 3 specs here being in B tier when those specs are in C tier. But the B and C is really close together, I would say. It's really hard to tell which builds are exactly where. But Willbender is really good. So Willbender for ranked is for me S tier. Because it has amazing damage, you have a lot of mobility, you have a lot of just raw damage output, and you can just really kill people a lot. I would say it is... The community thinks it's way too broken. I agree, it may need a nudge down, but I think a lot of people just don't know how to counterplay it. It's really important to know, because if you dodge the burst, they are actually extremely squishy and can't deal that much damage anymore. However, I understand that the mobility and the stability uptime is really annoying. That I understand, and I think they should just increase the cooldowns of all their skills so that it's more punishing to use. I think the damage, especially in high-end games, is actually necessary, because otherwise, for example, if you go in a County Reaper and you nerf the damage of a Willbender, they will not be able to kill a County Reaper, which is really, really bad. So this is needed. I think we need builds that are able to bunker bust, because otherwise it would be way too slow. I, however, think that Willbender is in a really bad spot for low-level gameplay, because people just get steamrolled by it. Even though the opponent is not really that skilled, they can easily dash out a lot of damage, and then use in silver might not be able to dodge that. And that's a big problem. So I think ArenaNet has a big decision to make if they want to nerf Willbender, because it's too strong in low elos, or if they want to buff or change how it works in high elo, because in really high level gameplay it's not that oppressive. So I think for ranked it's really good. It's an S tier, don't get me wrong. But I'm not sure if you want a Willbender nerf when you don't nerf anything else, because then we will be back in a bunker meta, which is not something you want. Okay, enough about Willbender. Let's talk about Core Guardian. So we had Core Guardian support a while back. And you can also play Hammer Guardian, you can play a Spear Guardian, but I think those builds are worse than Willbender for sure. And the support Guardian fell off quite a lot, because we have 2 other supports, or 3 other supports actually, that you can run. And therefore, this is for me quite bad. For ranked, at least. I would say Core Guardian is for me low B tier. Might be even lower, but I think it's an easy build somewhat, so I think that's fine if you play it as a support. Low B tier, that's where I would put it, yeah, for now. The other support that I was talking about is Firebrand. I think if you want to play a Guardian as a supporter, Firebrand is the go-to. It's not that much better than Core Guardian, but if you know what you're doing, you have actually nowadays more healing output and the same utility. So this is slightly better than Core Guardian. However, it's not even close to the other 2 supports. So yeah, I would say Firebrand is also low B tier. In ranked, that is. In ranked, you can make Firebrand work. In ATs, it's a little bit tougher, because you are really squishy as a supporter. And that can get punished really hard. So in ATs, that would look differently, but in ranked, I would say this build can perform quite well. Now we get to DH. So DH is in low level ranked matches really strong. The traps really destroy peoples. The longbow is also quite oppressive with the really hard-hitting skills. But in higher level gameplay, the DH decap builds are somewhat okay, but it's not crazy good anymore. They nerfed it, the healing, and it's not that strong anymore. So I would say DH is maybe low B tier, maybe C tier. For ranked, it's not that good anymore. Let's put it in B tier for now, just because you can really troll with it if you know Stronlo sufficient. This guy just really annoys people with the bunker DH, and it's just really oppressive, and a lot of people don't know how to deal with it. The Frenchies even played it in monthly ATs because it's really, really hard to deal with. And if you know how to play it in ranked, it can really be annoying because you can decap the point, you even can cap the point, and you don't have to win your 101. That can make enemy team rage quit because it feels so bad to play against. The spear is so strong on Mesmer. It's really, really good. It has amazing damage, it has AoE, it has stun, it has teleport, it has spoon removal, it has emobs, it has Condi glances, it has an evade. It's just the kit is overloaded and it's perfect. There's nothing that you want to have on this spear. Everything is there. So this is carrying every single Mesmer spec. However, if you're playing core Mesmer instead of Chronomancer, Mirage or Virtuoso, I think you are trolling, because if you don't have, you can't even play the spear without an expansion. So I would say core Mesmer is grieving, because the other Mesmer specs are way better. Why would you play core Mesmer when you have all the other specs? They are just base more. They deliver way more. And let's talk about the nerfs to Chronomancer. So you had really, the last year since the release of Rival, Chronomancer support was insane. You had so much healing, you had so much boons, you had so much just defensive skills for your team, for yourself. It's really strong. Even with the addition with Spear, you even got damage in your kit. That make this, it would be double S tier. Now they nerfed it over the last few patches, they nerfed it quite hard. However, I still think this build is really, really good. You can also play a slightly more offensive variant, which just uses Spear and Chaos straight line without inspiration. It's also really good. I would say it's still S tier. Even after the nerfs to Signet of Illusions, which is the biggest nerf they ever gave to a skill. But it's still run because it's so good. It's crazy. So, in my opinion, it's a really good build still. It has so much healing output, so much just passive boons and cleanses for your team. It's really, really good. The next build I want to talk about is Mirage. So Mirage is really squishy. However, the power one with Spear is really good. So the Spear on Mirage hits extremely hard while still having the abilities that Mirage has. So the dodge uptime, the just annoying jumping around, and they're just hard to catch, and the evade uptime. So I think Mirage is probably better than a power chrono, the Spear. Yeah, definitely. However, it's also more punishing. So I would say for ranked, if you can make it work, if you know what you're doing, this is a really good build. It plays like a Willbender with less sustain, but it has possibly more damage uptime. So I would put it in A tier. I think for ranked, Mirage is a really good build. Not a lot of people play it because it's really hard. You get punished really, really easily. But it's a fun build, and the Spear is extremely strong on it. Lang, I think you're right. You could put Bladezone into grieving tier. I think that is totally fair assessment to make. Maybe I should do that. I mean, there are some Bladezone enjoyers in chat, but to be honest, I don't see why you would play that most of the time. If you check the other, even Core Warrior is way better than Bladezone. Yeah, maybe I put it in grieving. I think you're right there. I think that's... Yeah, I think I actually played Bladezone for when EOD launched, I played it for 2 seasons straight because I really enjoyed it, but they nerfed it into the ground, and now it's just you don't consider it anymore. It's not working at all. I think it deserved a nerf, but that's too much. I think they have to rework it a bit. Maybe give it back the second weapon set, but I don't know. I think that would not fix the problems. But yeah, I think Bladezone is definitely something that needs a rework. For sure. At least in PvP. But also, I think in most game modes, actually, it's not that strong anymore. So, talking about Virtuoso, about Mesmer, I think Virtuoso is in an interesting spot. So, it has access to Spear. So, a power Virtuoso is extremely good because it has Spear, while still having the ability to go range. And this makes this build actually quite valuable. Because it has unblockable, ranged 1200 damage spikes that can corrupt wounds and deal a lot of damage, while still being quite mobile and having a lot of defense, sounds like a very good build. And that's why it gets into A tier. I think it's not that much ordered here. You know, those specs are all... So I want to put it out there. A, B, and C tier are not really ordered. You know, those are just builds that I put in those tiers, but tiers itself are not ordered. So I think Virtuoso is really good. People really underestimate how good Virtuoso is, Power Virtuoso. I think it's one of the rare roaming builds that can actually contest Willbenders. The reason for that is a Willbender has to go melee, and a Power Virtuoso can actually deal with a Willbender. Because you have really easy access to boon removal, you have ranged damage, and Willbender can't really deal with ranged damage because they just have to take it. You know, they don't have any ability to dodge it after they use their 2 dodges. Or their invulnerability, that's it. And Virtuoso will do it every 12 seconds. So I think that's a good build to counter Willbender, for sure. It's not as popular, but I think as soon as Willbender gets nerfed, this build will probably be one of the best builds that you can play, because it's quite easy. Mirage is way harder to play. It has more damage potential than Virtuoso, but Virtuoso is way easier to play. You have so much more just raw defense, and therefore it's a really good build for ranked. You know, you can survive outnumbered for a short time, you can easily damage someone. Yeah, it's just a really strong build. And it's probably one of the only ranged damage builds that is there. So currently only Data is the only one that is also dealing a lot of damage from range. But you can shut it down with Reflex. But also you can't shut down with Reflex. I think Core Elementalist, especially the buffs to Dagger, and also the Earth trade line buffs, made this build actually, or this class in general, really, really good. However, Core Elementalist is just overshadowed by the other classes that Elementalist has, the other specs. I might put it into C tier just because Dagger is so strong. People underestimate how much damage you have on Dagger. However, Tempest and Catalyst are way better because they can make use out of the damage while still having a lot of defensive utility in it, you know? So, Dagger Catalyst is extremely strong. You have so much aura uptime, you have a lot of damage, and it's extremely dynamic to play. You just spam your buttons, switch attunements, use your dagger skills, and most of the time you will do quite well. So I would say Catalyst for me is A tier. It's not as good as it once was because they actually nerfed it. Thanks for the follow, WarTV. Thanks a lot. And because it's not like the stability on, for example, on the aura is just 1 second, so it's almost useless. Or not useless, but it's almost, you have to be really aware when you use it. And therefore a lot of people now run the sphere trade, which makes your sphere really overloaded and it gives a lot of boons. So that's why it's so good. And now But I think it's A tier. Core Elementalist, in my opinion, is just a worse version of Catalyst, because the third trait line doesn't give you any big value in contrast to the Catalyst trait line. You might be right that it's easier to play, but I would say if you commit a little bit of effort and time into it, and then you will be way better with Catalyst. Yeah, I get your point that it's a little bit more confusing, but I think Catalyst and Elementalist in general, those two class, I think Catalyst needs a rework in that sense, because Catalyst is just an Elementalist with a new skill. But however, this makes this build really strong. So that's why this is here and this is here, because you have so much more boon access. This build doesn't have that. So I would say that's how I would leave it for now. And then we have Weaver. So you know something is wrong when Catalyst and Core Elementalist are high and Weaver is in D tier. Weaver is really bad. So why is that? Weaver gets access to some really nice dual skills, dual attunement skills. However, those dual attunement skills are very complicated. Sometimes it's really hard to get to. For example, it's really hard to get into your 4 and 5 skills. For example, if you run Focus Offhand, to get into your invulnerability skill on Earth, the 5th skill, you have to anticipate the damage, because it needs 3 seconds or 4 seconds to get there. So it's really not that easy to play. And the sad part is, it's not really rewarding. You can play some Scepter build and play some Fresh Air Weaver, which is just straight up worse than Catalyst. You can play some Fire Weaver, which is a really good side noting build. Like 5 years ago. Now it's just not as good anymore. You can surprise people with your Condi spikes. But if a Willbender looks at you, you're most likely dead, because they have so much damage and you don't have any stability. So if they knock you down and you don't have a stun break, you're dead. You're just dead. And you don't have any good protection application, because you can't run all the trade lines that you need for that. It's just horrible. I think Fire Weaver is just a really good build that is just power crept by all other builds currently. So I really enjoy Fire Weaver, but it's straight up not there. That's why it's in D tier. And now we have Tempest. So Tempest, in my opinion, got some big buffs. So we have 2 really good Tempest builds, right? So we have first the support Tempest build. That is, in my opinion, probably the best support right now. Maybe together with Chronomancer, depends a little bit on your playstyle. So you can either run Staff, which is really good in ranked. Welcome Barberchop, welcome to the stream. Which is really good in ranked Staff, because you have so much CC, you have a lot of ranged healing, you have good kiting potential and still being able to heal and support your allies. And Tempest is just a really, really good spec for ranked. Dagger Focus, I would say, has less healing potential, but is easier to play, because it has, your healing is around you, so you always know, oh, okay, if I'm standing on my teammates, I will heal them. With the Staff, it's a little bit, you have to be really aware where to put all your fields. However, the stability uptime with for your allies is lower on Dagger Focus, so I would say that build would be worse. However, your own self-sustain, is way higher. So if you get focused on Dagger Focus, you will survive for 10 seconds longer most of the time than on Staff. Because Staff, if someone has stability, you are dead if they look at you. And on Dagger Focus, you don't have that problem. However, there is a second build that is really, really good right now. I have a build guide about it on my YouTube channel. Be sure to check it out. It's some kind of hybrid Dagger Elementalist that has a lot of cleanses, amazing damage with power and condition damage, and has a lot of endurance regeneration, which is really interesting because no other build here actually is capable of doing that, to give endurance to you and your team. I think Core Warrior can do that, but not to the amount that a Tempest can, which is really interesting. And that makes it a true hybrid build. And that's why I would put it in S tier. Because it has so many different builds that are all actually quite good. They are quite good. And in most ranked situations, being a hybrid build makes you very valuable because you can go into one-on-ones, you can go into teamfight, and still be able to be valuable to your team. And that's something that I really value really highly, and that's why I would say Tempest is the last S tier build I have right now. I would say the sad part is we have some outliers in the top and we have some really big outliers in the lower end, but A and B tier are quite fine. Yes, the only class that is not good is Engineer. I think Engineer is the only class that is really to the lower end, and they should definitely change something about that. I think they should rework Scrapper or Hollow Smith to make it more of a new build that makes sense. For example, Shortbow would be really interesting if they made it somewhat of a support Scrapper build. If that would be viable, that would be nice, you know? But Shortbow is not played amazing. Pistol is also horrible. So the Engineer is just a really weird spec right now in PvP. So I would say that's something that they should address. And I would say that the top end is really strong, while the down end or the bottom end of the classes is so far away from everything else. Yeah, it's just sad at this point. But I'm really happy that we have so many classes in A and B tier, because that means we have a lot of builds that you can play and have fun with without being totally trolling. Do you have any comments? Do you think that makes sense? Do you think I coped on something or I missed something completely? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like. If you want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.